geez, you could have at least dressed for the damn meeting. I mean, there's like, crap, what, $4 million on the table on this one? And you didn't even shave. Well, we got
2 hours from now, I'm due to be out at Bright Angel. Are they going to come out and help me out there?
Come on. No, they're not, but at least, you could have dressed a little bit.
No.
Look, I'm doing some archival tape.
Well, that's running.
Yes, it's running. Thank you.
What is this archival tape number?
I don't know.
8,600,022.
Probably, yeah. I figure we've got I don't know, a few minutes here.
This is like the fourth time you've run an archival tape in the last 8 or 9 days.
I know.
Is there something that you're not telling me?
No, I'm just trying to get as much down as I can. Besides, I gotta get you warmed up anyway for this open mind stuff.
Warmed up?
Yeah. Yeah. Because we're gonna be going down there, and you gotta talk all about the bays.
They're gonna have some plans, some general plans done, but I know you want me to go through the.
I'm gonna have you go through them with
the specifics.
I'm gonna want you to go over each of the craft, because the thing is we gotta populate the whole thing, and that doesn't just mean everything but the bays. We're gonna have to put the craft into the bays.
Right. Well, there were only 2 bays that were empty when I was in there the majority of the time. They were sitting empty, and then there was one that had I presume a craft that had a tarp over it that I couldn't really ascertain what was in it whatsoever. And then the Roswell craft, I understand, was under the one tarp, and then its reproduction vehicle was in another bay.
Okay, now let me ask you something here, because the Roswell craft, the information that you got about the Roswell craft,
yeah,
did that come from direct observations, or was that mostly from briefing stuff? How did that come?
Most of the information that I have about the terrestrial, the P-24 Roswell craft was from direct briefing.
Okay.
It was a generally chevron shaped, and it took its control surfaces, took the lines on the outside of, I guess we could tell them about the F-22. And the inspiration for the F-22 Raptor.
Yeah, it inspired it, but yeah.
The actual craft, though, that I saw was under a tarp. It was a very heavy black leather tarp, and I'm not sure if you made it by the base at all.
No,
or
they had me directed down a different way. I never got to the base.
So off into surveillance you went.
I went off over toward the fire control and off into the surveillance of communications.
Yeah, and the reproduction vehicle I saw uncovered some bays down from the tarpaulined vehicle, and I could clearly see a generally triangular shaped craft with bay windows in the front of it. Now I know that inside the craft, for instance, a lot of this ufological lore is all bold about how the craft looked and all of that. I've heard some very strange ideas about what the craft was and all of that, but it was generally a terrestrial craft. It was actually built to generally operate in the environment which we have now.
That's what most people don't realize, is it was really not intended to be anything but terrestrial.
Right. It was provided a time jump, if you will. I mean, I know the popular term is jumping because of Battlestar Galactica sci-fi that came out, but there was a jump from their time to back into our general time frame, and of course that ended up terminating in 1947. But the seats, for instance.
What about the details on that?
Well, there were molding seats. For instance, the individual would sit down into the seat, and they would actually get into the seat. It was almost like a body glove situation, and they were able through biofeedback. They coming back in or what? The biofeedback systems. Let's hope they're done.
Wow, what the hell is this?
I don't know. There's not supposed to be any other meetings in here
No, there isn't.
right now aside from our own. So maybe it's just security going through the back.
Maybe.
In any case, through biofeedback systems and direct biological interface, they were able to control the craft without control surfaces, without
Like joysticks.
Joysticks and the like. No buttons or anything like.
So it basically
like
was biofeedback from their own neural systems. And
right. It was a direct feed, a direct input from the neural systems into the craft, and where they looked specifically had to do with the implants like Corso.
I'm sorry, what were you saying?
I thought they were coming back. It was a direct neural interface with the craft. Their eye implants, which were handed down specifically from a father to son situation, was for control of the craft in the same way as a young person may become in a society officially a man through rites of passage. The control operators who operated craft and had specific duties in their society were handed these eye implants by their elders for use in the society. So it was actually like a father-to-son situation within mating pairs. These eye implants directly interfaced with an area which was set up around the head of this body glove situation for the seats. So if you were to look at the three seats which were set up in the inside the front of the craft, they appeared like what people would, I guess, popularly relate to like mummy type
Like a
shapes.
sarcophagus?
Like a sarcophagus.
Were they covered in the front, or when the person got into the seat, did it go all the way around them, or did it stop about?
Well, they were actually a type of smart metal and smart plastic. And so what would happen is they would sit down in the seat, and the seat front would actually mold inward as they would sit down, and then it would wrap up and around them and self-seal. So they were actually in a sarcophagus
So
type.
fully encased.
Fully encased.
Well, that kind of begs the question when you said that there was like windows in the front of the thing. If they were fully encased in their bodysuit, what's the purpose of the windows?
They were able to see out of the windows through the eye implant interface.
Okay.
So they actually had projectors, if you will, or monitors on all of the windows.
Okay.
So they were able to see out.
All right.
These were for transport during their time. They were basically used for transport in their time, terrestrially.
Well, about how large
aeronautically.
a craft was it? How many people could be on board it?
Well, there were enough seats for three. It was about maybe 25 feet from tip to end. And generally, like I said, chevron or triangular shape to it. And I know that there were three seats in it. There was storage capability and equipment capability for storage on board. But I'm only aware of the three seats.
I was thinking
The occupants were three, as I understand,
transport. I was thinking transport of what? Material or people or what? I mean, if there was like cargo areas or what?
sampling material, investigative material, recording equipment, weapons.
They were coming back definitely to record and,
Right.
and observe.
Right. Their specific reason for coming back at that time was an exchange reason. What they were trying to do is they were trying to influence what was going on in popular society and in global society at the time. They knew what we were leading toward.
When you say exchange, a lot of people misunderstand that. They think it's
Not
going to be like
exchange.
to grab somebody and bring them to that time and then leave
Or you
somebody
mean like
else.
the Serpo garbage?
They presume, and then they build these Serpo.
No, I'm talking about nudging of society forward by influencing what was present in society. And it was a matter of psychological, matter of political nudging that they were intending on doing. And what they can do is just simply interface with computer systems, add information into the computer systems, and while an individual who might be sitting in a particular white-collar laboratory in an IT service or the like, would see an idea in front of him that could be added, and he would become its inventor.
Aha.
it was a way of nudging forward and hopefully nudging forward to a lack of catastrophe.
Right.
They had 24,000 years to after recovery to slowly work on it. So then they started going back in time in an effort to prevent what was going to happen to us, what we've inevitably now avoided.
Right. So it was about 25 feet.
About 25 feet in length. Yeah, tipped a tail on the craft.
Okay.
That's the reproduction vehicle that I saw.
What's the exterior?
And I could see the blue-white sarcophagus-like items inside the craft in the reproduction vehicle, but I could not see the actual vehicle, which I was told was the Roswell vehicle. I didn't actually physically see it. It was under a tarp. Yeah. It did match the general shape of the vehicle, though, that I saw in the later bay.
The one that was the reproduction vehicle. Mm-hmm. What was the exterior? Was it like what, gray? Was it?
Yeah, it was a pearlescent silver. It, as I understand, was a silicon composite, and it was very beautiful. But it had a shine to it. But you know how an individual almost seems how they swallow their words when they speak. Yeah. The shine seemed to come from it, but it was almost swallowed by the iridescence of the craft. It was very strange. Okay. It was very strange appearing. And this was a reproduction vehicle, so I'm making the assumption what they were doing is they were reproducing the craft as best they could using technologies that we had available to reproduce it. Again, I'm not an engineer, but that's what it looked like, the reproduction vehicle. Okay. And the so-called, I don't like the name of it, but the so-called sport models that were called in the first couple of bays looked about the same. Their surface looked about the same. There was really no texture to mention, no graininess to it or anything like that. They were very, very smooth in appearance, and the iridescence was about the same as the Roswell craft for those two. The Orion ship, which was down at 4, which was right after what I heard was the Roswell craft under the tarpaulin. Okay, there was there was 9 altogether bays. Well, there were 9 bays. So it was about midway down. Yeah, there were 7 bays that were filled. One had the tarped Roswell craft. One understanding was the tarped Roswell craft. Then there was one item that was tarped off that I didn't know what was under it. Never heard what was under it. It was just a tarp that was covering something. It was a lump, essentially an amorphous type lump sitting there. So something was under it. So that's the Roswell craft. The under a tarp, the tarpaulin that was just an unknown subject. There were 2 sport model-like, a typical flying saucer with a protrusion on the top center and the bottom center, which made it look a typical flying saucer type. Okay. Format.
Just out of curiosity,
the bottom protrusion did not look like the sport model, the so-called sport model that's out in children's toys and models, or how it was exactly described by Mr. Lazar. So it was close, but that's not exactly how it looked. How did the bottom look? There was a protrusion. The bottom did not appear as aerodynamic as what I've seen, at least in the drawings. As the bottom of the hull, if you will, moved downward, there was a somewhat of a deformation downward, and then it wrapped under. So the deformation actually looked more pronounced than what I've seen described. Okay. The deformation on the top of the craft appeared generally like I've seen described, except for there were still too many defined edges to it. It almost seemed that it was entirely curved. Okay. It looked like a manifold mathematician's nightmare. It was entirely curved. It was very beautiful. I didn't see any item extended up from the top center, what some people have called a periscope. I've heard
no.
called a periscope.
Come on.
I didn't see anything like that
Okay.
on the craft at all. And I didn't see anything that looked like a port that would support it on the top of the craft. I saw the tops of the craft.
Because you were looking down.
Right. From the catwalk.
From the catwalk,
I didn't
yeah.
get a chance to really look from the first floor at all because I couldn't open the doors to look. And when I was passing through the first floor area, none of the red shirts would allow me to look. The Galileo people would allow me to look in there.
So if there was a deformation on the bottom of the craft,
Yeah.
did you see, I know looking down it's hard, but did you see how it was set? Was it set on a platform? Was it hovering?
I can't really say for bays 1 and 2 because I could see through into bay 2, and I saw actually through into bay 1 from bay 2 from the catwalk, but I can't really say. Maybe it was attached. This is conjecture. Maybe it was attached to the system to conveyor it down into 1B.
That's right.
But it did not appear to be moving or otherwise hovering.
Okay. Because there was that transport system that was used to rotate it halfway down so that it could be given the diagnostics and everything.
Yeah, it was generally brought up on a between a 30 and a 40 degree angle and then dropped down into the 1B area where they worked on them and did diagnostic of some variety. That wasn't part of the project.
Okay. Now the Orion craft, that one didn't have the same exterior configurations.
No, it was different. That's the exact word I was thinking. It was configuration.
Configuration.
No, it looked like a skirted sphere. It was dark gray, and it had no iridescence from its surface at all. It just looked like a dark gray skirted, multiply skirted, ripples, if you will, or ridges along it, sphere. So it's as if you would take a cone and cut the cone near the bottom and then set a sphere down into that conic section.
A cone?
Well, you take the, okay, well, I don't have a cone here, but...
You mean upside down cone?
Well, no, not like an ice cream cone.
Oh,
Not like
okay.
an ice cream cone. Now, if you have a cone, if you have I'm thinking geometrically a cone.
Oh, that kind
Not
of
a-
cone. Not. Sorry, I was thinking of like
No.
pecan ripple or something. A cone.
There was no pecan ripple. Now we're going to start talking about strawberry ice cream now. There was no pecan ripple.
Double chocolate fudge.
There was no double chocolate fudge either.
Oh, rats.
No, the bottom of a cone. If you take a cone and you set the cone, a dunce cap.
Okay.
Very familiar to me.
You cut it off.
You take a dunce cap
Okay.
and then you cut the dunce cap near the bottom and you get rid of the top of it. And then set a sphere down into the center of that. That's generally the configuration that we're talking about.
Ports, windows, doors, feet, antenna, periscopes.
No.
No.
The ripples were even smoothed. They were not trapezoidal solids as I've seen drawn. Parallel trapezoidal solids around the periphery
I've
of the
seen
base
that
of the
too.
conic section. No. And the sphere appeared, well, it appeared almost like a hemisphere, except for there was more of the sphere above the, I don't want to get into geometry on it, but above the, what would be the center. How to describe
Okay,
this?
it's like
For people
more
to-
of the sphere is on top of its pedestal.
More of the sphere was exposed than was not exposed.
Got it.
So that is what led me to believe with the Orion craft that it was a sphere set into it, rather than a hemisphere set upon it.
Mm-hmm. See, what kind of confuses me about the Orion craft is that the pictures that I've seen of the Orion
Oh, with the little chairs
ships, no, the Orion
These are
ships.
7 foot tall to 8 foot tall beings.
Yeah, that's, you see,
With
it's
the little
crazy.
chairs in it?
No. But what I've seen, the pictures that I've seen of those Orion vessels,
Yep.
they are elegant and graceful and long and linear.
Oh, you're talking about the ones on orbit.
Yeah.
That's different.
They are gorgeous.
These
and
are
they have,
earliest.
They have like
These are earlier.
no bearing,
These are
nothing resembling it.
No. The craft which was there as part of an exchange program. This craft was part of the earliest exchange program that went back into the Eisenhower administration. The stuff that they showed up with later on to remove the heirlooms and such.
Those craft
and to
are
deposit.
gorgeous.
Oh no! They're very. They remind me of Silent Running.
Yes, very beautiful, very
That may be
linear
very
and
presaging.
graceful. But what's in those bay?
No, that's
what's
just
in that bay is like,
just a two-person. That's a two-person Orion vehicle. That's not a multiple-person interstellar craft.
Okay.
You could fit 1,000 of those little tiny Orion craft that I saw up at S4 into one of those.
and have room.
Oh, yeah,
Would have
room to
room
spare.
for people and
Room to spare.
room to spare. Tons of room to spare.
No, those were here and there are still a couple on orbit that were left.
I know. And
And I don't think it's probably even an archival tape appropriate to discuss
no, but
what
I'm
would
just
be the ultimate
purpose. No,
end.
I'm just not even going to get there. I was just making a comment
Not
about
the
the
purpose.
structure.
The purpose is they got stuck here just in case.
I know, but I'm just
Stay
saying the
behind.
structures are so different from what I've seen. That's just amazing.
Yeah. Well,
It's in the
they're,
bay.
it's as different as what one would make talking about ships today, a dinghy versus a cruise liner.
Yeah, exactly.
It's they had variations in their craft, have or would have. This is a paradox we're talking about. So
Yeah.
would have variations in their craft, just like we do.
Yeah.
Anyway,
So
the
about how
Orion
big
craft.
is it? The one that's in the bay.
Oh, about 30 feet diameter, circle laconic base, about 30 feet in diameter, and about 15, 18 foot tall.
Okay.
So they are a lot flatter, if you will, than they are tall, as seen in most of these hokey drawings. They're actually a lot flatter. They don't exactly look like what I've seen drawn. And that's one of the problems. That's one of the problems in the testimony. There are very small, I'm talking about Bob's testimony.
Yeah.
There are very small things about his testimony that don't add up. Now, there's a couple different possibilities that can be worked through here. That he didn't really see it, and all of this was put together and then concocted with folklore of better descriptions of things that people actually saw, that then there were secondary drawings made of them.
Okay.
Or and there was an agreement with certain people in ufology to move this forward, for fame.
Yeah.
For fame.
Yeah. Well, he was.
And
he
that
was
didn't even work out well.
My God, he was supposed to be his quote unquote ticket to the big
That
time.
didn't work out well, and I think it's possibly because of the anger, the defensiveness, the rudeness. People usually behave that way when they're afraid.
Yeah.
Why is he afraid?
I don't know. Afraid of discovery.
Not afraid.
Afraid that
Maybe.
he's
Not afraid of violating interstate commerce laws.
Oh no, he's done that.
But afraid to provide the real information of what you saw in the bays. Something is not adding up. Something. Now, like I said, I didn't work with the man.
No,
there.
I know.
Now, there's a possibility that he was there only for a very short period of time, and then also allowed everything else to be fed into the testimony.
Well, there's because if he was only there for a short period of time, there's only so much that he's going to be able to see.
Right. Well, he didn't know about the rest of the facility,
Exactly.
and Rightfully so.
He thought it ended right where his nose ended.
Can you imagine, okay, can you imagine that if he ended up seeing the rest of the facility, aside from what was in the bays, and he didn't even describe the licorice drop or anything like that. But
No, we got to get into that too, because
right.
I want to make sure you...
Can you imagine that if you would have seen the rest of the facility, aside from the nurse's office and maybe clerical and a restroom, okay, if you'd seen the rest of the facility, can you imagine the amount of correction? I'm thinking that it's going to be difficult right now, involving the great people at Open Minds and all of that,
Oh,
the
yeah.
corrections.
And
And
God love them, they've been gathering material.
Can you imagine the job that would be ahead?
Well, apparently they've been researching this for some time and gathering material from as many sources as they can. But the problem
Who's
is...
talked from S4?
Right. The problem is whatever they've managed to get their hands on, it's probably going to require a lot of corrections, a lot of work. So it's going to be a big job. But it's worth it, I think, because it's going to give people the first real look, the first real view inside of it.
To the limit of national security.
Well, of course.
Those items.
Yeah, I want.
I'm not going to get into any weapons or anything like that.
But I really want people to be able to feel what it was like inside that facility, because
That's
I know
fine.
it was really, what little I saw of it was amazing.
Mm-hmm.
It was amazing in good ways and bad ways at the same time. You know.
Yes.
Because, yeah.
It was more bad initially.
Yeah.
For me, it was more bad initially than good. However, there was excitement about the contents of the laboratories. And then it gradually turned better.
Right.
And then when I understood more about what was going on with the J-Rod, it actually took a very dark turn, because then I started realizing what we may as a people be facing. So it turned into something that was a worse nightmare.
Yeah.
For me.
Yeah.
But ultimately for you as well.
Yes. Yeah, we've been...
But
what an experience this has been.
yeah, then aside from those items, I can help you. I can help them draw what these things actually and construct what these things actually look like.
We're going to have to, because, you know, I mean, I want to go down to the details on what was in the laboratories, what the tables, what the cabinets looked like, things like that. So we're going to need the details on the ships. What about the licorice drop? That was your favorite, because we're going to have to, be telling them that so they can.
It was black, and it looked like black mercury. It looked like, this is the best description I can give of it, without going ooh ah ooh all the time. And I do that when we talk about it, but it looked like what I felt from Kaila's eyes.
Ooh.
I felt with Kaila's eyes, as I said before, as an entrainment would be proceeding, as though I could fall into his eyes. Looking into, or looking at, but it felt like looking into the small black, generally triangular item sitting there, as though I could look into it forever. It looked like space without stars.
Wow. Was it smooth? Was the triangular angles really defined?
It was defined, but yet it was smooth. The tip and the two base vertices, if it was a triangle, the vertices were fairly well defined. But everything else looked very smooth. It had a protrusion on the top, a generally triangular protrusion along the top, but that protrusion was very smooth as well. It was not. It had a very nice curvature to it. It was, I only saw, I saw it from this angle and I saw it from this angle. I did not see it from the open bay angle. And that was because I didn't look, because as I got down next to the open bay, there was the seal standing, so I turned around and I walked more, and as I walked, then I generally curved over toward the windows to
Yeah.
look, the bays over the base to look. And so I just kind of slowly learned how fast that curve could be as I was walking away from the seal without him yelling at me too quickly.
Right.
And so I didn't do it very quick in front of him because it would be very pronounced, but I gather they figured the game out eventually anyway. So I got a chance to see it generally from the front, mostly from if this were the front, this were the rear end. In most cases, I saw it from this angle
Okay.
to you.
Okay.
Okay, so I was coming off. It wasn't exactly down midline of the triangle that I was seeing it, and I don't know what it was. It had to have been some type of a craft or a probe, but nobody ever spoke about it. I tried to catch, over listen. I even tried to listen sometimes by hanging out at the in the Nevada room at the get extra napkins or try to hear the wise men talking. And most of the time they were talking about Kaela. They weren't, or nothing. And they were using their little tap code on the table, how they would talk to each other, and it was as impossible as what we've concocted over the communication that we've put together over the years. I don't know what it was. It was just black mercury sitting there.
About how big was it?
Probably about 12 feet from tip to end. It was not very big.
Not that big.
No, 12 feet, and it was isosceles. The triangle shape, the general triangular shape, was isosceles.
The footprint was triangular?
Yeah, if you were to see it from above, it was triangular. And it appeared to have the distension above the triangular solid, or almost a rounded prismatic solid on the top. It appeared to be the same shape underneath. It appeared to be. There was a situation involving, because of the lighting in there, of shadowing, and so it became very difficult to ascertain exactly what it looked like underneath. And I don't know if there were any openings underneath or anything like that. I know that there was none on the top, or at least it certainly didn't appear to be any. And that accounts for all of the craft I actually saw.
Okay, and there was
all
two
of them
bays that were empty?
I'm sorry?
When you were there, we were looking at it, was two bays that were empty?
Yeah.
Okay. And one tarp over an unknown, completely unknown.
Over an unknown, yeah. And that unknown appeared to the tarped area. There was a bump under it, so there was something sitting there. And if I were to guess, I would say that there was a saucer of some sort sitting there, a saucer shape. But I'm really not sure. I mean, the tarp was pulled over it, but it was not pulled over it uniformly. So there were areas of distension underneath that did not appear to be distension from an object pushing up through it. It appeared to be distension by simply not pulling it uniformly.
Okay.
There was crinks in the tarp.
And these are heavy tarps we're talking about.
Yeah, they were like a black leathery tarp. We're talking several hundred-pound tarpaulin.
We're not talking about parachute material tarps. We're talking about
Oh no,
heavy.
we're talking about very heavy, thick, leather-like covers.
Was there any, did you notice ever any seams or anything? Like
On the covers?
The covers, yeah.
I didn't notice.
Okay, it was just...
It just appeared to be a very large stick of black chewing gum. That's what it looked like to me.
Okay. All right. I think that's about... Yeah, because we're going to have to go over all the details on the ships, as well as all the contents in the laboratories.
Yeah, I don't know where some of these drawings come from. I have seen a couple of them
That's what
since
got me
retirement.
baffled.
These little chairs in this thing. The Orion craft carries two people, two Orions, and there are no chairs.
Now, they're tall people.
Uh-huh.
They're tall people, so, I mean, they would just be, just standing.
Yeah, on the inside of the sphere.
Yeah, but
You know, yeah, I know how they work.
Yeah.
The sphere actually rotates, and the people are inside the rotating sphere. They did not, during the divergence in the species, they don't become dizzy. Now, this is one thing about Orions that is not in the testimony anywhere. There is balance, but it is coordinated balance. It's balance which is almost voluntary.
voluntary balance.
They're strange. It's a very voluntary type balance system. They do not have the little calcium carbonate, for balance for the ear, right? They don't have that. They don't have that. And so spinning does not negatively affect them. Two of them would sit opposite from one another in molded beds inside the wall of the sphere. The sphere rotates, the skirt doesn't.
So you say sit in the bed, you mean you're just kind of like in the bed?
You know the carnival. You know exactly where I'm going.
Exactly what you're talking about. There's
the
that
carnival
spinning
rides.
ride that
where the bottom falls out, and then by centrifugal force you are.
And you're held back against it. Yeah, I know the ride.
Yeah.
So it'd be like that.
Exactly.
And
they sit opposite. They sit opposite from one another and communicate to one another opposite to each other with a hologram in the center of the sphere. Where they get all these tanks and that is so 1950s.
Yeah. Now, when you say sit, you don't mean sit. You mean
they are
kind of like stand.
They are impinged into a molded feature in the interior wall of the sphere.
Full length. They just sort of back into it.
Yes.
Okay.
And then they're held there in the spin.
In the spin. Now the hologram in the middle.
Kind of like a looking glass type hologram, like what we've discussed, except for it also takes verbal commands from here.
From the mind.
And when I say verbal, I'm not talking about the acoustic verbal. Mm-hmm. It takes verbal commands, and that's what controls the ship. It has nothing to do with these little gas tanks and this kind of garbage that we saw from the RAM idea and all of this. It has nothing to do with that. But I don't think you want me to begin talking about how to build them yet until they want to.
No. Many more zeros before we give up too much information on how to build them.
And of course with us, and that's why they never fly them. That's why human beings never fly these things. You can't.
Oh.
Can you imagine?
Oh my God.
That's why they sit there. That's why any of the photographs, there are a couple real photographs out there of Orion craft in the air, but they're from years and years ago, okay, that were caught just by average people photographing them, okay? But that's why people have seen sport model type craft flying through our atmosphere that have been uniquely set up by reverse engineering with larger seats in them. That's why the Orion craft are never seen. You cannot get into one of these things and fly as it is intended to fly without dumping into the ground because you get dizzy.
Oh, jeez.
I mean, that'd be fun to watch.
That'd be wild.
The ultimate fun ride.
Oh, no.
Fly for 10 seconds in an Orion craft.
A face plant.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yuck.
Yeah, can you imagine?
A face plant in one of them? No.
Can you imagine that? But they're actually molded into the walls of the sphere as it turns. I don't know where they get all these ideas, these little tiny seats in an Orion craft. And they know that it's an Orion craft. I mean, that even leaked out into popular ufology. Okay? These are Orion craft. And they know that the Orions are generally called talls, or they were called tall whites, or Nordics, or all this
or whatever
business.
they wanted to.
And they put these tiny little seats. I don't know what they were for. Maybe the Orions get smaller. I mean,
they're big people. They're big people. They're noticeably big people.
Yeah, they are.
Yeah.
Over the last 30 years, there have been thousands of reported sightings of unidentified flying objects over the British Isles.
You think I'm bloody daft, but this is a UFO.
In the summer of 2008, reports of flying saucers and other crafts were capturing the headlines again. Over the years, numerous eyewitnesses, including military personnel, police officers, and experienced airline pilots have testified to seeing strange lights in the sky and other mysterious phenomena.
12 o'clock. Very bright yellow object.
It was nothing like an aeroplane that I'd ever seen before.
It's the brightest light I've ever seen in my life.
Many of these UFO sightings remain unexplained to this day. But what or who were they? Could they really be evidence of extraterrestrial life?
Yeah, it's a strange, small red light. Weird. It's coming this way. It is definitely coming this way.
It was just something out of a science fiction film. It was totally unbelievable.
Tonight we hear firsthand from those who witnessed them and examine the truth behind some of Britain's most celebrated UFO sightings. In 1977, Broadhaven in West Wales became notorious as a UFO hotspot.
There have been a number of calls to the police station. Every call referred to objects in the sky.
Dozens of witnesses claimed to have seen mysterious lights and objects around the village.
It was an orange object, which seemed to be split into several... one or two segments. Yeah.
The number of sightings left locals shocked.
What on earth was that?
Experts baffled.
We could offer no explanation.
And even sparked a Ministry of Defence investigation.
The Ministry don't tend to do investigations of UFO sightings. It's extremely unusual.
The phenomenon would become known as the Broadhaven Triangle. In February 1977, 9-year-old David Davis was playing with his friends when they noticed something strange in a field behind their school.
A silver cigar-shaped object, about the size of a bus, popped up from behind some trees as if it was trying to take off. I don't know whether it was stuck, but it seemed to pause for about 2 or 3 seconds and then disappear back behind the trees again. It was only a matter of seconds that I actually saw the object, but it imprinted itself on my memory forever.
The children ran back inside and alerted their teachers.
Ralph Llewellyn, who was the headmaster at Broadhaven School at the time, he got us all together, and in exam situations, he got us to draw what we'd seen and describe it as well.
At the time of the sighting, Hugh Turnbull was chief reporter for local paper The Western Telegraph.
I had a call to say that the children at Broadhaven School had seen something remarkable. They didn't actually say they'd seen aliens, they didn't say they'd seen this thing hovering overhead. They'd seen something inexplicable.
Hugh drove down to the school to interview the group of children who were aged between 9 and 11 years old. He wasn't anticipating what they were about to tell him.
I spoke to the head teacher, Ralph Llewellyn, and he showed me some of the drawings that the children had done. And it was evident that there was some similarity between the drawings. Some were a bit far out. Some showed alien figures, some didn't. But in general, they were showing the same sort of object, the same shape of object. And having those pictures made it obviously a very much more exciting story.
Initially skeptical about the story, Hugh decided to retrace the children's steps. He asked one of them, David Davis, to take him back to the place where the object had been seen.
I took a look around the field. We were looking really for any sign that an object had been there, be it from this planet or another planet.
There were no car tyres or tracks or anything, but a telegraph pole cross member had been dislodged and was now sort of sitting at 45 degrees.
Their journey took them past the gates of the local sewage works, which lay directly behind the field where the sighting had occurred. Liz Philpott, an administrator at the school at the time, had her own theory as to what the children might have seen.
Later in the afternoon, we walked down the lane to the sewerage depot, and there are big wrought iron gates there, so we rattled on those until someone came out, and it was the man in charge. And I asked him in confidence to tell me whether or not his men had driven a tanker down into the field. And he said, absolutely not. No way could we get down there.
I think these children, whatever they saw, it was something unusual, and a sewage tanker I don't think would have fitted into that category. Also, it would have been a very difficult place to get a sewage tanker into because it was steep. I think the weather had been wet, so there would have been signs of tyre tracks.
Many of us came from farming backgrounds, so we knew it wasn't anything agricultural.
Persuaded by the children's testimony, Hugh decided to run the story.
I think I recognised immediately that this was a much bigger story than we'd had previously about UFOs. I don't think I realised how the story would take off and that it would become a major international news event in the way that it did.
In the winter of 1977, a group of children in Wales claimed to have seen a spacecraft hovering behind their school playing field. When the story hit the newsstands, Broadhaven, a small seaside village with only 600 residents, suddenly found itself the focus of intense public interest.
An investigation has begun into a claim that something strange came out of the skies and landed in the Welsh village of Broadhaven near Haverfordwest. Whatever it was spotted by children from the local school.
We just couldn't carry on normal lessons. The phone was going off every couple of minutes. We were even getting researchers and interviewers from as far afield as Australia, New Zealand, America, all wanting to talk to the people who'd seen the flying saucer.
The incident at Broadhaven Primary School appeared to be a baffling one-off event. Until reports of other strange sightings began to surface. 5 miles from Broadhaven in the village of Herbranston, Maureen Deiter also witnessed something for which she had no rational explanation.
I was out one day during the week having a bit of fresh air at night, and I happened to look up in the sky and I saw this cylindrical object with lights on it, and it was going very fast. So it was only a question of really seconds that I actually saw it. And I thought, what's that? I couldn't believe my eyes.
The village of Littlehaven lies 1 mile down the coast from Broadhaven. Local resident Dorothy Cale was setting off from home one evening when she too observed something strange.
We went out from our house, which was on the cliff top at Littlehaven, and there were some flashes, very, very bright flashes, which lit up the whole village. All of a sudden, there was a very strong light. The driver put her foot hard on the brake quickly. There was the brightest light I've ever seen in my life, and it appeared to be inside a glass dome. Well, it took our breath away, really. We all of us looked at it. Nobody said a word. This was a strange thing. None of us said a word, and then all of a sudden, we didn't see it lift up or go anywhere. It was just gone. It flashed, and it was gone. And our driver said, "What on earth was that?"
The light resembled nothing Dorothy had ever seen before. But astronomer Ian Ridpath has been investigating UFO sightings for over 20 years. He believes there's usually a very straightforward explanation for such strange lights in the sky.
People in general don't know the sky very well, the night sky, and people can very easily be fooled by the sight of a bright star or planet, particularly when it's low down and particularly when it's twinkling. And at night there is really no way to estimate the size and distance of an object, and people can think that something is actually much closer to them than really it is.
Whatever the cause, the sightings in the area continued. Like the incident at the primary school, some involved more than one eyewitness. Stephen Bamford and Robert Best were returning home to Broadhaven after a night out when they noticed something unusual out at sea.
We probably saw the people before we saw the object. Yeah, we wondered what they were all looking at. Yeah. We assumed it was probably the cliff was on fire.
It did look like a fire, but it was obviously out to sea, and it moved from right to left. It was an orange object, which seemed to be split into several...
one or two segments.
Yeah.
And then we thought we'd be brave and drive out there, or drive in the general direction to see if we could sort of find whatever it was.
And then as it moved across, or they moved across, they just shrunk and disappeared.
Diminished on itself.
Yeah.
The men could think of no obvious explanation for what they'd seen.
So I thought it might have been a harvest moon or something at first. I thought, you don't get a harvest moon at 1:30 in the morning.
If it had been a ship or something like that, it couldn't have been in front of the cliffs at one moment and behind the cliffs at the next. So it was a very strange anomaly, and that's why everybody was stood out here watching it.
Psychologist Chris French has made a study of the reliability of such eyewitness testimony.
Now, in situations where we've actually got evidence from multiple witnesses, and that evidence seems to be telling pretty much the same story, everybody is saying the same thing, then we're quite likely to give that kind of evidence much more weight than single uncorroborated testimony. But one thing we should bear in mind is that when people see something unusual, such as a possible UFO sighting, then they will actually discuss what they've seen with each other. And we've got lots of good experimental evidence to show that one person's account of what they've seen can actually influence another.
But with the sightings continuing to flood in, many were convinced that something strange was happening in Broadhaven. By now the police were being drawn into the mystery.
There have been a number of calls to the police station. Every call referred to objects in the sky, and always some distance away, travelling in a particular direction, and then just disappearing into thin air.
People were ringing in and writing letters all the time. The ones that I was more convinced about were the ones who said, well, I'd rather you didn't use my name, but I saw this. It was really the start of what they call the Broadhaven Triangle.
They call it the Broadhaven Triangle, an area here in Pembrokeshire where sensible, down-to-earth people are constantly seeing strange objects in the sky, mysterious lights. It's an area where an entire classroom of schoolchildren saw from their playground a UFO.
The triangle encompassed the southeast of St Bride's Bay, through Broadhaven, down to Milford Haven, and towards Haverfordwest inland. It was an area of coastline which changed dramatically from mile to mile. Could the area's local geography have been a factor in the sightings?
There's a number of oil refineries and other industries around Milford Haven. Flares at night and odd-shaped plant, but people around here would have been very familiar with that. Those had been there for many years before anybody started seeing UFOs.
The number of sightings reported in the area meant that what had begun as an intriguing local story was turning into a much bigger phenomenon. It was what UFO researchers like Dr. David Clark call a flap.
The word flap became associated with periods of intense UFO activity concentrated in certain areas from the mid-50s onwards. So it's a word that becomes part of ufology from that point onwards. Now, the first real flap that seems to have occurred in the UK was the one at Warminster in the 1960s.
For 10 years, the town of Warminster in Wiltshire was famous for being a UFO hotspot. Unlike the Broadhaven sightings, the flap in Warminster began on Christmas Day 1964 with a mysterious sound.
People were reporting hammering noises, things shaking the roofs of their houses, machinery type noises going overhead, and when they came out and had a look, nothing was wrong.
By May 1965, reports of lights in the sky had begun to surface. Local journalist Arthur Shuttlewood connected the lights and sounds, and the Warminster Thing was born.
He was writing for the local newspaper, and he got more and more obsessed with this and went out skywatching himself. The more he wrote about it, the more the story became part of the local legend, and lots of other people then started saying they'd seen things.
It was the sheer number of sightings that made Warminster unique. We are stood here on Cradle Hill, which was the main skywatching location. And every weekend, every Saturday throughout the 60s and the 70s, there could be up to 50 or 60 people up here observing and watching for the thing.
Kevin Goodman was one of those who took to the hills, travelling to Warminster to investigate the phenomenon.
It was very much a communal thing. It was like-minded individuals searching, looking for something, wanting to be part of something.
After several months, Kevin witnessed something himself.
Over in that direction, from over by the golf club, came 4 red lights, equally distant, spaced apart. They carried on travelling through, around and over to Battlesbury Hill, which is over here. They stayed in the line for approximately about 2 or 3 minutes, and the lead object then shot upwards at a tremendous rate of speed, performed a flawless 90-degree turn without stopping, and shot out of sight. And about 30 seconds later, the following 3 lights then just shot straight up into the sky. To this day, I can't really rationally explain what I saw.
The skywatchers were identifying hundreds of UFOs in the hills. But how reliable were their reports?
One of the important things about Warminster is that it is surrounded by various military bases and camps. There's an artillery school there. There are various tank training areas around there and around Salisbury Plain.
The area was one used to military activity. Covering 150 square miles, Salisbury Plain was the largest military training area in the UK. And that wasn't all. 18 miles from Warminster, an experimental establishment conducted trials of prototype military aircraft.
The ufologists would say that the reason that you get so many sightings near military bases is because the extraterrestrials are very interested in what's going on at those bases, whereas it seems far more plausible to argue that what's happening is that it's the activity at the bases themselves.
Like Warminster, Broadhaven was also surrounded by military bases. Close to the village was RAF Brawdy, a base for search and rescue helicopters and a training station for military pilots. Could it have been that it was simply RAF activity that was responsible for the Broadhaven sightings?
Well, Brawdy at the time was a very, very busy base. It had aircraft taking off and landing as frequently as Heathrow Airport at some times of the day. So there's an awful lot of activity going on there.
As RAF Brawdy's community relations officer at the time, Squadron Leader Tony Cowan found himself fielding calls from anxious locals who'd seen things around Broadhaven they couldn't explain.
We had a look at the flying programme, which was easily accessed, and see if we could relate the time of the incident or the reporting to the time of activity that was taking place at our airfield or indeed in our area.
Sometimes the answer was obvious.
Apart from the training of the jet pilots, there would have been exercises involving our local search and rescue helicopter unit, the local lifeboat stations and the Coast Guard as well. I can remember at least on one occasion it was quite a big exercise involving all those people plus a Nimrod patrol aircraft to carry out a search, and it did take place at night, and the Nimrod was dropping flares to illuminate the area so that the lifeboat could spot the target.
But Dorothy Cale, who'd witnessed strange lights near her home in Littlehaven, wasn't convinced this was the explanation.
We could see Brawdy Airfield quite clearly, so we were very well used to seeing all sorts of lights and flares and things like that. It was nothing like anything we had seen out to sea or across the airfield.
And RAF flight records didn't always prove conclusive.
On some occasions we were able to explain by relating the time and the date to known air activity. On other occasions we could offer no explanation. I think to the people that saw something, they will always remain a mystery.
RAF engineer Gordon Bowden was stationed at Brawdy in the late 1970s. Years of experience had taught him that military activity could often be misidentified.
Helicopter beams, searchlight patterns can appear very strange depending on the compass direction that the helicopter is operating from and the search pattern that the helicopter is conducting. And to the untrained eye, you'll get a visual which will look like a ball of light, and then if it moves a different pattern, you'll get the beam.
But not all the UFO sightings around Broadhaven were witnessed by untrained civilians. Gordon also witnessed them himself.
On 2 occasions at Broadhaven, I did see strange lights out at sea. These lights that I saw accelerated with such phenomenal speed. I cannot explain what they were, but my military training would have said we had no aircraft at that time that could have travelled that fast and changed direction so quickly, because it would have killed the pilots.
If flight activity at the RAF base couldn't explain all the Broadhaven sightings, then what could? Brawdy was not the only military establishment in West Wales. Less than 500 metres away lay a secret facility. It was run by the United States. US military bases have been connected to some of the most celebrated and well-documented UFO incidents in Britain.
Yeah, it's a strange, small red light. Weird. It's coming this way. It is definitely coming this way.
Could these American bases provide any clues to what was being witnessed on British soil? In 1977, the village of Broadhaven in Wales became infamous for a series of supposed UFO sightings. Why were so many people reporting mysterious lights and objects in the area? With the RAF and local police unable to explain all the sightings, attention turned to the secret US base that lay 10 miles from the village. A seemingly innocent research establishment, the base became the focus of local speculation.
It was a top secret establishment, and those people that that worked within the facility were very strict with their security codes.
They were very hush-hush about what was going on there, and if you rang them up, somebody would say, US Navy Brody, this is not a secure line. Why were they worried about secure lines if it was just an oceanographic research establishment?
It wasn't the first time on British soil that there had been strange phenomena sighted around a US military base. On 2 occasions, US air bases in Suffolk had been at the centre of supposed UFO activity. The first sighting took place in August 1956, when radar personnel at US Air Force bases Bentwaters and Lakenheath observed something strange on their screens.
The Lakenheath incident caused all kinds of concern on both sides of the Atlantic. The Americans alerted the Royal Air Force. The radar station RAF Neatishead began tracking these same mysterious objects, and it led to a very, very bizarre evening in which waves of RAF fighters were scrambled to go look at this thing over Lakenheath.
2 aircraft gave chase, but failed to intercept or identify the object. Running low on fuel, they returned to base and the object disappeared from radar screens.
The Lakenheath case had never been fully explained, and it was the first of a whole series involving military establishments in the East Anglian region.
Nothing else significant was reported in the area for 25 years, until the night of December the 26th, 1980. Local garage owner Jerry Harris lived next to the joint US Air Force bases of Woodbridge and Bentwaters. He was returning home when he noticed some peculiar lights above him.
My wife turned me to the helicopters. So I said, no, they're not. I said, because they're helicopters, they're going to crash into the trees.
The lights were hovering above Rendlesham Forest, which lay between the bases. What no one realised at the time was that this was to become one of the UK's most iconic UFO encounters.
They kept moving about. They went sort of downwards and then disappeared. All of a sudden this thing came out of the trees. When it got to the top of the trees, it took off and flew up into the sky, straight as an arrow, and disappeared out of sight, and I couldn't see it anymore.
Jerry decided to investigate the mysterious lights.
I went round in my van to have a look, and I was stopped from going into the forest by an English policeman and a military policeman. They're both together, and they said I couldn't go through the forest, so I had to turn around and come back.
Jerry put the sighting out of his mind, and the Rendlesham incident seemed forgotten. Then, 2 years later, the story resurfaced after an anonymous tip-off to a national newspaper.
It was in 1983 that the story first broke and became headline news. The News of the World got hold of this story and put it on the front page. A UFO lands in Suffolk, and that's official. This blew the story wide open.
Nick Pope used to run the British government's UFO desk at the Ministry of Defence and has investigated the Rendlesham Forest incident.
With Rendlesham, what you had was a report from the deputy base commander of one of NATO's most important military establishments. And here he was saying not only had some of his personnel witnessed a UFO, but he'd seen it too. Colonel Holt is probably the most senior military officer ever to have gone on the record with a first-person written account of a personal UFO sighting.
With the story now out in the open, an extraordinary piece of evidence was released by an officer from the Woodbridge base. A tape recording of Colonel Holt's investigation.
Colonel Holt took a small team of men out into the forest to investigate, and he recorded his observations as he went out into the forest.
You just saw a light where see it too. What is it? We don't know, sir. So can I get some of it? Yeah, it's a strange, small red light. Weird. It's coming this way. It is definitely coming this way. Pieces of it are shooting off. There is no doubt about it. This is weird.
You can hear the tension in Colonel Holt's voice. You can hear the tension actually in all of Holt's team.
Okay, we're looking at the thing. It looks like an eye winking at you. It sort of has a hollow center, a dark center. It's like a pupil of an eye looking at you and winking. This is unreal. We're turning around, heading back toward the base.
These are not people who mistake aircraft lights for something more exotic. When these people say, and go on the record as saying, we experienced something above and beyond anything we've ever seen before, you can take that to the bank.
A UFO sighting made by several credible military witnesses made the Rendlesham story unique. Astronomer Ian Ridpath has investigated a number of UFO cases and was keen to get to the bottom of the airman sighting.
When the Rendlesham Forest case hit the headlines in 1983, I realised that I actually had to take this case seriously because it had apparently very good evidence.
But conversations with locals soon convinced him that the Rendlesham case was not all it had first appeared.
From the position in the forest where they saw their flashing UFO, you can actually see straight to the Orford Nest lighthouse, which appears to hover between the trees, not very far off the ground. And as you move towards it, between the trees, the light seems to recede in front of you, which is exactly the effect that the airmen reported as they moved towards this flashing light, but they never actually got to it because it got further and further away.
I've been to Rendlesham Forest at night, and anyone who's been to Rendlesham Forest at night and has seen the lighthouse will realise that it's a tiny pinprick of light in the distant horizon. There's no way that Holt and his team could have misidentified that for something more spectacular.
Jerry Harris and the US airmen had reported that the lights in the forest had moved in strange directions, but this too could have had a rational explanation.
I knew from experience that bright meteors or fireballs, which are natural pieces of debris from space burning up in the atmosphere, can give the impression that something has come down quite nearby. I was able to find from the British Astronomical Association that indeed a bright fireball had been seen at that same time that the men had seen something apparently descending into the forest.
Ian Ridpath's evidence suggested that the UFO was nothing more than a combination of unusual but naturally occurring phenomena.
It appears to be an absolutely superb, almost inexplicable case, but when you look at each of those aspects individually, there is a rational explanation for each of them.
But this conclusion didn't satisfy everyone. If the lights did have a rational explanation, why were the Americans so reluctant to discuss it?
All the Americans I knew from the base, and none of them would talk about it at all. They weren't allowed. And they had strict instructions from up above not to talk about it. So I couldn't find anything from them whatsoever. They would just try to cover it up.
When a wave of UFO sightings had hit Broadhaven in West Wales in 1977, attention had also turned to the US military. Not far from the village lay a secret US base. When strange lights and objects were reported in the area, speculation grew that the Americans were developing secret, state-of-the-art military technology.
Nobody really knew what was going on there. So I think it's quite a possibility that all this could be linked to some sort of military activity.
But when the base was deactivated in 1995, the truth about the Americans' activities was finally revealed.
As it turns out, they were listening for Russian submarines at the height of the Cold War.
Far from developing prototype weaponry, The mysterious building had housed nothing more than banks of computers and monitoring equipment. This revelation put paid to the theory that the mysterious lights in Broadhaven had come from the secret US base. But the sightings were about to take a bizarre new turn, with accounts of more than just unexplained lights in the sky. 2 months after the first sightings, dozens of eyewitnesses reported seeing strange silver figures around the village. Police officer Ernest Jones personally investigated one of the sightings.
A call came into the control room there, and I happened to be in the station. A report of a sighting of a silvery figure quite close to a dwelling.
The call had come from the Coombs family, who lived on Ripperston Farm, a few miles from Broadhaven. Although the Coombs no longer wished to talk about the night's events, Ernest Jones remembers them well.
So here I was going to a farm on a dark night, in the middle of the night, not knowing exactly what to expect, but expecting to get close to something that nobody knew nothing about. So a few things were going through my mind. We arrived in the yard, went to the front door, doors open, we went in. There was a family there, established her husband and wife, spoke with the wife. She was very, very frightened. Got over her eyes, she saw a silvery figure moving about very close to the window. Her husband, he turned round and saw this figure very close by the window outside, where he'd been sitting. He was really frightened as well. And we're not talking here of a softy man working 9 till 5 in an office. We're talking of a man and quite used to going out of the house all times of day and night, checking on cattle. No way would he come out of the house with us. No way. So went out, we had a look around the house, around the back, the garden, the fields nearby, the cattle pens, checked machinery.
With the silver figure nowhere to be seen, PC Jones returned to the house and made arrangements to evacuate the family.
From the condition they were in that night, especially Mrs. Coombs, she didn't feel safe, and she didn't feel the house was safe for the family.
The Ripperston Farm incident was not an isolated one-off. Reported sightings of strange silver figures were taking place all over the area. With the mystery deepening, the investigation would now step up to a new level.
The MOD branch, which was responsible for UFOs, they had received quite a few letters from members of the public, and they'd seen all the lurid press coverage of the Welsh Triangle. And there's one particular memo from the head of the MOD UFO branch to the RAF police. There's a lot of concern in West Wales. Something's obviously been seen. Some of these witnesses are quite level-headed, reliable people. Could you make some discreet inquiries into what's been seen there? The very fact that the military were interested was very, very unusual, because the ministry don't tend to do field investigations of UFO sightings. It's extremely unusual.
The Broadhaven Triangle was now being taken seriously at the highest level, and an MOD investigation was underway. Its conclusions would be completely unexpected.
They call it the Broadhaven Triangle.
In 1977, Broadhaven in West Wales became known as a hotspot of UFO activity. Claims of lights, strange objects, and even silver figures were being made by dozens of local witnesses. 6 months into the sightings, the MOD decided to launch an investigation. In itself an unusual occurrence, and something not made public for nearly 30 years.
Before the Freedom of Information Act came into force, you have to remember that the default position of the Ministry of Defence, an inherently secretive organisation, was to say nothing. In 2005, the Ministry of Defence's report on this incident was finally made public.
It does look as if some discreet inquiries, as they described at the time, were made, and the answer that came back, which is mentioned in a briefing to the Defence Intelligence staff later in 1977, was that a practical joker was behind some of these more bizarre reports that had reached the ministry.
The practical joker revealed himself to be Glyn Edwards, a local businessman from Milford Haven.
We had a round table dinner, and the theme was a fancy dress dinner. So, as it was topical at the time, I decided to dress up as a spaceman. So I borrowed an industrial suit from one of our local suppliers. I went to the dinner, and before the dancing started, I went out to the car to remove it, but some of my colleagues said, let's go around the village. So we all jumped in the car. Bumped into a few people, turned a few heads, and after about 10 minutes we decided to go back. Going back then, we stopped outside the Haven Fort Hotel. I started walking up the drive in this silver spacesuit, and they had the headlights of the car behind me, so I was silhouetted going up the drive of the hotel. All my colleagues were hiding in the bushes at that time, and one of them said, there's somebody in the window. I went a bit further, and another one shouted, oh, she's got a gun. And I thought, right, that's it. I dived under a rhododendron bush and lost my footing and rolled all the way back down to the road. One of them said, let's do it again. I said, not so likely. If she's got a gun, I'm off. So then we went back to the hotel, changed out the suit, and we just carried on with the dinner.
With such an obvious explanation for the Little Haven sightings, why were so many people willing to believe they'd witnessed something extraterrestrial?
We know that eyewitness testimony can be very, very fallible. People genuinely and sincerely believe that they've seen something that day which defies any conventional explanation, but the evidence from psychological studies would suggest that we should actually take those accounts with a pinch of salt.
But the hoaxer has always denied responsibility for one sighting, at Ripperston Farm. P.C. Jones, who investigated the incident, has kept an open mind.
I can't help thinking of the state they were in that night. There was something certainly out of the ordinary that frightened that family.
As 1977 drew to a close, the number of UFO sightings in the area began to decline, and the unusual events were consigned to memory.
Given the large number of people who saw it and the number of pretty intelligent people who came forward and said they'd seen something, I think most people think there must have been something behind it. Not necessarily flying saucers, but something.
Because we didn't know what it was, we just sort of ignored it and decided if we don't know what it was, we can't talk about it.
And it just, that was it. It just went away, really.
For many who witnessed the Broadhaven phenomenon, it remains something that they find difficult to explain.
I'm a very rational person, and I say I don't believe in UFOs, but having seen something unusual myself, but it seems ridiculous to me, really, to think there's something from outer space that's come down and settled in Little Haven.
There's no physical evidence, there's no photographic evidence, and that's a great shame, because I think most people have an open mind about the whole business, and I think if you look into a night sky, you must believe that there must be something else out there. What it is, I don't know.
I'm absolutely sure of what I saw that day. I saw an object that was large, cigar-shaped, silver. After 30 years, I'm no nearer the understanding than I was on the day that I saw it. But I am 100% sure that what I saw that day is as we reported it.
We follow 3 women who decided to forgo traditional medical care and have their babies at home with no professional assistance or pain relief. Extraordinary People Next sees just how they got on.